is Fukushima Facts, and it's ran by Drew Lambs. Now, Drew was up on the Alex Jones show with David Knight a few months ago, and he's got the most incredible story I've ever heard, and I don't know what to make of it, and so I'm going to have to put a video out there. Now, you got to realize Drew is not a scientist.
I'm not a scientist.
He's not an expert.
I'm not an expert.
He's a businessman, and it's Fukushima.com.
I'm more of a businessman than anything else.
Now, Drew is going to tell a story about how a person at Hanford Nuclear Waste Site...
Now, Drew, welcome. Now, one of the things I thought was really interesting was how you got involved with this, why you were concerned about this, your friend who works at the Hanford Nuclear Power Plant. Tell us a little bit about that.
A friend of mine put me in contact with a gentleman who was working up at Hanford in Washington, handling nuclear waste. And he had disclosed to me that during a routine checkup at his work that they had learned that he had cesium-137 in his body. And of course, they had to do an investigation to figure out how this had happened. You know, was there, did a container leak, and was he exposed to something there at the reservation, or what happened? How did he get this? So they were able to determine that the cesium-137 had originated from the Chernobyl explosion that took place in the mid-'80s. So they had to figure out, well, how did he get Chernobyl cesium-137 inside of him? He didn't work over there, obviously, and they didn't handle nuclear waste from Chernobyl. And so they did some research, and they put two and two together, and they figured that he had ingested cesium-137 when he consumed elk meat from an elk that he had killed in Oregon. And apparently that elk might have been grazing on grass that had phyto-extracted cesium-137 from the soil. And that cesium-137 got there because it rained. And
that's interesting. You know, when you're talking about your friend who got cesium-137 from Chernobyl.
By the way, they had 450 billion gallons of radioactive material poured out of their containers into the soil in the 50s and the 60s.
What they're not telling the public is that they also deliberately dumped out of the high-level nuclear waste tanks in the 1950s and 1960s billions of gallons of liquids into the soil.
They got 200 miles of groundwater, square miles of groundwater contaminated with radiation.
Well, Hanford has 200 square miles of contaminated groundwater below the site there, and that is spreading over time because the contaminants in the soil are leaking at a constant rate into the, into the groundwater.
Hanford has 41 miles of open pits.
I know this sounds incredible to people, but there are 40 miles of unlined trenches at Hanford, if you stretch them end to end, into which our federal government, your government, was dumping radioactive waste from nuclear weapons production and its own reactors until the year 2004, when we put those pictures on air and in our campaign literature for Initiative 297.
So I don't know if Drew is just really naive. He can't research on his own and find out some basic things about Hanford.
I'm more of a businessman than anything else.
It's really odd for anybody to be that gullible. Maybe it's just me, where I know a lot of things. I don't see things that way, but
just like we saw in the friend of yours who was working at the Hanford Nuclear Power Plant. And the interesting thing is that they found it only because they were monitoring him at a nuclear power plant. Typically, we're not looking for this kind of stuff.
Right. With mammals, material like cesium-137 builds up in the muscle tissue.
This is probably the most dangerous stuff on the planet ever. Very, very small quantities of this waste. And it's been said that a Dixie cup full of this waste in a crowded restaurant, everyone would be dead in the restaurant inside of an hour. Even the amount that would fit on the leg of a fruit fly is considered a problem dose, and that's happened at Hanford. Fruit flies have landed on contaminated materials and then flown off to go to the lunchroom and deposit contamination on food and on tables and whatnot, and they've had to evacuate a 20-acre area at the Hanford site because of hot fruit flies and wasps. So this waste in these tanks is very dangerous in small quantities, and it has another feature, which is it's dangerous for very, very long periods of time.
Yeah, that's interesting. You know, when you're talking about your friend who got cesium-137 from Chernobyl.
He had ingested cesium-137 when he consumed elk meat from an elk that he had killed in Oregon. And apparently that elk might have been grazing on grass that had phyto-extracted cesium-137 from the soil. And that cesium-137 got there because it rained and
if we want to restore Hanford to its virgin conditions, we're going to bankrupt the country. It simply cannot afford that kind of money.